I'm Ariana Cole, 36 years old, Chief Growth Strategy Officer at Northbridge Dynamics. For the past 3 years, my entire life has revolved around work and the endless pressure of data driven projects. And that night, I had no idea I was about to witness the moment that would rewrite my future. I still remember the second I stepped into the 8th floor atrium of Northbridge's headquarters that evening. The place was glowing, bright lights, laughter everywhere. Navy blue ribbons, Northbridge's signature color, hung along the glass walls. The smell of wine mixed with expensive faux perfume drifted through the room while soft music floated down from speakers hidden in the gleaming ceiling. It was a chilly night in Seattle, but the air inside was so warm I had to take a slow breath just to steady myself. They said the party was to celebrate 500% growth in 3 years, a number people in our industry kept calling a miracle. But to me, it wasn't a miracle. It was 3 years of pouring my entire life into this company. 3 years of waking up before sunrise and ending my day when only the security guards' cars were left in the lot. 3 years of thousands of tense meetings, hundreds of detailed reports, countless business trips with no real days off. All of it to drag Northbridge Dynamics back from the edge after that disastrous data collapse. As I walked in, several colleagues looked at me with admiration. Some even smiled. Warm, sincere smiles I rarely saw in a place as competitive as this one. I nodded back. It wasn't that I wasn't happy, it was that I've never known what to do with praise. I'm used to working in silence, fighting in closed door meetings, being asked for more and then more again, without so much as a good job. I had just picked up a glass of champagne when Marissa, the CEO's assistant, approached me. She leaned in and whispered that Richard wanted me ready to head to the stage when he gave the signal. I wasn't surprised. A small part of me had already wondered if tonight might be the moment he announced my new title. Not because I'm hungry for power, but because I've been doing a vice president's job for the last year and a half without the title to match. Still, I didn't dare believe it. At Northbridge, promises lived longer in someone's mouth than they ever did on paper. I closed my eyes for a second to steady my pulse just as the lights in the hall dimmed. A bright spotlight hit the stage. Richard Hale stepped out from the left, wearing that familiar, confident smile, perfectly tailored to charcoal suit, neatly combed hair, shoes polished enough to catch the light. I'd worked directly with him for 3 years, and I knew one thing well. Richard could make you believe he was fully on your side, right before signing a layoff order without blinking. He opened his speech with stories about the company's rise, the impossible hurdles we'd overcome, and then shifted to praising the team for its relentless dedication. I stood among the crowd, quietly reading every word on his lips. When he started talking about the data transformation project, I knew he was about to call my name. And he did. He extended his hand toward me and announced that I had carried the heaviest responsibility in the company's history, leading the team through its darkest months. The applause around me was so loud I could feel the floor tremble. I stepped up to the stage at his invitation, keeping a small smile even though my heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. Standing beside him, the spotlight blurred my vision for a moment. Maybe it was the lights, or maybe it was the quiet certainty that after everything, I was finally being recognized. Richard said all the right things: my persistence, my precision, my leadership, things he rarely expressed aloud. I felt like the moment I'd been waiting for was just seconds away. But then the tone of his voice shifted. Richard said Northbridge Dynamics was entering a new era, one that needed youth, fresh vision, and new energy. I tilted my head slightly, not quite understanding. And right then, the doors at the end of the atrium opened. Evan Hale walked in. I recognized him instantly. Evan, the CEO's son. The 24-year-old intern who had appeared a few months earlier. Modern haircut, expensive shoes, and a type of confidence you couldn't tell was talent or inheritance. He walked toward the stage, smiling in a way that didn't match the sudden tension thickening the room. Richard placed a hand on Evan's shoulder and announced that he would be the new vice president of growth strategy. The title everyone assumed would be mine. The title I'd effectively fulfilled for more than a year. I heard a wave of whispers sweep through the room, along with a few awkward coughs. Some people looked at me, waiting to see how I'd react. Others looked away, unable to stomach the scene. I kept my face still, but I felt it, like someone had drained every drop of blood from my body. I was standing on the stage, yet it felt like the world had stepped back, leaving me alone in a cold, hollow space. Evan approached me and held out his hand. I had to take it. His hand was warm, confident. Mine was ice cold. I smiled, a smile I knew had no life in it. No one on earth can prepare for the moment your work is stripped from you in front of an entire company. No one. While Richard kept talking, his voice booming like he'd just given me an award instead of taking my future away, I stared at the floor. I couldn't hear anything anymore. All I felt was a strange, eerie calm settling over me. The kind of calm that only comes after something inside you breaks cleanly. When the applause faded, I stepped off the stage, grabbed my bag, and walked straight out. No eye contact, no goodbyes, no looking back. Because one thing was clear to me: this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. When the doors of the hall closed behind me, the noise inside faded into a distant blur. I walked down the long corridor, my heels hitting the floor in sharp, hollow beats that matched the emptiness spreading through me. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want anyone looking at the face I had held together on stage, but was now losing piece by piece. My office was on the 7th floor, and when I pushed the door open, the room was pitch black, as if it had been waiting to swallow all the emotions I'd been holding back. I switched on the light, set my bag on the desk, and walked toward the large window facing the Seattle skyline. The city lights outside were still sparkling, untouched, uncaring that my entire life had just been knocked off its axis. I exhaled slowly, feeling something inside my chest tighten like a string pulled too far on a violin. And then I began to remember all the signs I had ignored, or more accurately, refused to face, because I didn't want to believe my work could be dismissed so easily. Evan. He had shown up in strategy meetings at strange times, sitting quietly in the back at first. Then, suddenly, Richard began turning to him for input on decisions far outside his expertise. Back then, I told myself Richard was just teaching his son, passing down experience. But now, everything was crystal clear. Evan had never been there to learn. He had been there to step into a role I had built with my own blood and sweat. And then there were the promotion review meetings. The first time, Richard canceled and said he had a board session. The second time, he claimed he needed to look over the quarterly reports again. The third time, he didn't give a reason at all, just had Marissa reschedule indefinitely. That should have been a direct warning, but I convinced myself he simply wanted everything perfect before signing off. The company was too busy. I built an entire logical story to silence my own instincts. But the biggest warning came from Julia, my closest friend at Northbridge. 3 months ago, HR summoned her and asked her to sign a financial report with numbers that didn't match the system. Julia refused. The next day, she was fired for department restructuring. Julia cried while packing her things, and I sat beside her, helpless, unable to do anything. I didn't see the whole picture at the time, but I felt something deeply wrong beneath the surface. I sat down, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder I had hidden on my drive for 6 months. It all started with an email from our largest client. Their technical lead had said our performance data summaries didn't match theirs. He was polite, but between the lines, there was a clear suspicion. I remembered the sharp jolt in my chest as I read it. I brought it to Richard, but he waved it off, saying the client had misread the data. He told me to leave it to him. I agreed because he was the CEO. But a week later, that same client sent a follow-up, apologizing for a misunderstanding and saying everything was resolved. I found it strange, but I moved on. Now, looking back, that apology smelled like a deal made behind closed doors. I opened each file. The mismatched data tables. The last-minute report changes Richard sent asked me to adjust. The times he told me to push deadlines into the next week, like he needed time to rearrange something behind the scenes. One piece fit into another, and then another, until the picture in front of me was no longer a theory. Richard had been preparing to remove me, step by step, carefully, methodically, as if I were just a disposable pawn. At first, the only thing I felt was disappointment. Thick, cold disappointment that settled over every thought. But as I kept scrolling through the files, each page, each number, each ignored email, that disappointment began to shift. Disappointment became clarity. Clarity sharpened into awareness. And awareness hardened into something cold enough to reshape my entire being. I no longer wanted to cry. I no longer wanted to be angry. I no longer needed explanations from Richard or anyone else. The only thing I wanted was the truth. And when the truth finally stood in front of me, I knew I was no longer standing there as a victim. I was standing on the edge of a decision I would not be able to undo once I crossed it. I stared at the glowing screen and closed the folder. For the first time in months, I felt absolute stillness, as if my mind had settled into a new center of gravity. A place from which I knew I would never let anyone step over my work again. And what happened tonight was simply the final spark that set everything into motion. I sat in my dim office with only the glow of my laptop lighting the room, the cold, steady calm inside me sharpening by the minute. I reopened every file I had saved over the past 6 months. When I first began collecting them, I didn't know what I was looking for, but now I understood that every piece was pointing towards something far bigger. I pulled up a chain of quarterly revenue reports. The adjusted numbers Richard had once asked me to tweak at the last minute now appeared more alarming than ever. Comparing the raw data to the final versions, the discrepancies were so stark I couldn't understand how I hadn't seen them sooner. But when you're trapped inside the grind, you follow orders and assume the person above you knows what they're doing. Now I knew Richard had used those reports to inflate the stock value at the exact moment he needed to sell off shares. I opened another folder. These were emails from the accounting department asking me to verify various expenses. Hidden inside were suspicious consulting fees. Companies with no websites, no public records, not even a trace on any business registry. And yet, quarter after quarter, they received massive payouts from Northbridge. I remember Julia asking me about those fees, telling me something felt wrong. Weeks later, she was fired for refusing to sign off on a doctored financial report. I scrolled through the transfer list. Many entries had vanished from the official accounting system. If Julia hadn't saved the originals, I wouldn't have found a single trace. Someone had deliberately removed evidence. This wasn't carelessness. This was intentional manipulation. A cold shiver ran down my spine, forcing me to pause. My instincts told me I was only scraping the surface. I opened an older document, one I never imagined would matter, the list of Northbridge Dynamics founders. When I first joined the company, I read it as part of learning its history. Eleanor Hale's name appeared beside Richard's as co-founder. But 4 years after the company launched, every trace of her vanished from the corporate archive. No resignation announcement, no legal documentation, no sign she had left voluntarily. I scrolled through old messages Julia had sent me, including one she received from legal. They claimed Eleanor left because of disagreements. But if it were just disagreements, there would be no reason to erase her from the company's history. That only happens when someone wants her contributions buried. A heavy, dark thought formed, one that made too much sense. Eleanor may have uncovered financial irregularities long before I did, and Richard forced her out to secure absolute control. I closed my eyes as the fog in my head began to lift. I was no longer looking at a CEO favoring his son, no longer looking at a delayed promotion or stolen credit. I was looking at years of financial misconduct, carefully hidden, still in motion. I took a slow breath, opened my eyes, and kept reading. The suspicious fees, the altered reports, the sudden stock spikes, the erased co-founder. Employees were removed to silence them. The ex-wife was wiped out of the company's narrative. And now I, pushed aside from the role I had earned. I no longer felt anger. Anger was for someone hanging on to hope. What I felt now was clarity, cold, sharp clarity, like the edge of a blade. I closed every document and sat up straight, feeling as if I were stepping into a newer, harder version of myself. I knew I couldn't stay at Northbridge much longer. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood this company was no place I could coexist without being pulled into its darkness. But leaving didn't mean surrender. I would not walk away empty-handed. I would not allow 3 years of my work to vanish as if it never existed. and I would not let Richard continue to manipulate people the way he did Eleanor, Julia, and now me. I would leave Northbridge, but I would leave in a way that forced him to face the consequences of everything he had done. And if Richard believed I would quietly disappear like the other women he had pushed out, he had underestimated me completely. That night, when I shut my laptop and looked out at the city through the window, I felt the shift inside me. No turning back, no hesitation, only action. And once I acted, Northbridge would never be the same again. I arrived at the office earlier than usual the next morning. The building was so quiet I could hear my footsteps echo across the floor. When the door to my office opened, a strange emptiness washed over me, as if this place had already become unfamiliar the moment I walked out the night before. I sat down, opened my laptop, and placed my hands on the keyboard. There was nothing left to hesitate about. I began typing my resignation letter line by line. I kept it brief, polite, but final. I didn't mention a reason, didn't bring up Evan, and didn't acknowledge the public humiliation. I simply stated that I was leaving under the terms of my contract and was willing to transition my responsibilities as needed. When I read it back, it felt like closing the last page of an old chapter. I saved the file and shut my laptop, but I didn't send it. Not yet. The timing wasn't right. I needed to leave, but not passively, not rushed, and not in a way that let anyone erase the work I had done or turn me into a convenient scapegoat for everything being covered up. I spent the morning reviewing the list of major clients I had personally overseen for the past 3 years. Some of them trusted me more than they trusted Northbridge's leadership, and I knew that. I decided to speak to them one by one, but not as a representative of the company. I picked up my phone and sent 3 personal messages. I simply said I wanted to meet to discuss upcoming data directions. No mention of resigning, no mention of internal issues, just a neutral invitation, light enough not to raise alarms, clear enough that anyone perceptive would understand something more was behind it. Before noon, 2 clients replied, agreeing to meet within the week. One of them even called me directly, his voice calm but with a noticeable hint that he'd heard whispers about irregularities inside Northbridge. I answered only with measured silence. It was too soon to say anything. Everything needed to unfold in the right order. When the workday ended, I didn't go home. I drove straight to South Lake Union, an area packed with small tech firms, tucked between quiet cafes and new buildings. I had contacted a leasing office a week earlier, just an instinct back then, a precaution. But now it felt like the smartest decision I'd made in months. The manager led me to a small room on the 3rd floor. It was barely big enough for 3 desks and a tiny conference space, but the large window overlooking the lake made it feel bigger. I stood there for a few seconds, watching the sunlight dance on the water, then turned around and signed the first 3 months of the lease. On the line for business name, I wrote Cole Insight Group. Seeing my signature beneath it made everything real. The new company wasn't an idea anymore. It existed. The next morning, just as I set my bag down, Marissa appeared at my door, looking tense. She handed me an envelope stamped urgent. I opened it and scanned the woe. Contents. It was a formal directive from Richard ordering me to hand over the entire strategic data system within 48 hours. No explanation, no context, just a command. I folded the letter. On the surface, it looked like standard protocol, but to me, it revealed one thing. Richard was afraid. Afraid of what I knew. Afraid I'd walk out before he locked everything down. Afraid I had seen too much. I set the letter on my desk and returned to my work. I had no intention of defying the order. I would complete the handover by the book, and I knew exactly what my legal rights were. I didn't delete anything related to the wrongdoing. I simply saved copies and stored them somewhere safe. If things escalated, I wouldn't let myself be the one carrying the blame. As I was reviewing the systems, a light knock sounded at the door. I looked up to find Evan standing there, looking nothing like the confident man from the night he was introduced on stage. In his eyes, there was uncertainty, like he was carrying a weight he didn't fully understand. I invited him in. He closed the door, hesitated, searching for words. He said Richard was under extreme stress, that he believed I was being uncooperative. Then Evan tried to explain that he hadn't known anything about the promotion announcement, that he had no idea his father planned to put him in that role. I listened quietly, expression unreadable. Maybe he was being honest. Maybe he was trying to distance himself from Richard's decisions. But it didn't matter. He was standing in a position built on my work. Whether he knew it or not, he was the beneficiary. I said only one sentence. Evan, this stopped being about a promotion a long time ago. This is about everything your father has been hiding, and whether you like it or not, you're standing right in the middle of it. Evan didn't respond. His face shifted, understanding mixed with fear. Then he nodded faintly and left the room without saying another word. When the door closed behind him, I stared at my computer screen and felt it. The moment of leaving was coming closer than ever. But I wasn't leaving alone, not this time. I submitted my resignation on a gray, cloud heavy Seattle morning. No embellishment, no long explanations. I simply stated the effective date and confirmed I would complete a proper transition. When I hit send, a sharp wave of relief moved down my spine. Not because I was happy, but because I had finally chosen my own path instead of standing as a pawn under Richard's control. Minutes later, my inbox lit up nonstop. Messages of encouragement, confusion, and shock. I read each one, then closed the window. I had gone far enough to understand that what waited ahead wouldn't be easy. That same day, I announced Cole Insight Group on my professional platforms. A simple post. I was leaving Northbridge and starting my own venture. No mention of conflict, no reasons, just a straightforward career update. The reaction came faster than I expected. By the end of the day, I received an email from Northbridge's legal office. They were officially suing me for stealing trade secrets and poaching clients. Attached was a request for a temporary restraining order. The tone was clear, heavy, and exactly Richard's signature move: strike first. I read every allegation carefully, each one baseless. I had never taken any intellectual property from the company. The only things I carried were my memory and my own skill. But Richard knew one thing. The moment the word lawsuit appeared next to my name, everything I was building would shake. And he wasn't entirely wrong. 2 days later, anonymous posts spread online accusing me of betraying the company that raised me, stealing internal data, and contacting clients behind leadership's back. Some even cited sources inside Northbridge, claiming I had hidden confidential documents. I knew exactly who was orchestrating it. Richard never fought fair. The attacks came so hard that a few major clients I had met the previous week called me, their voices uncertain. They said they still wanted to work with me, but Northbridge's legal pressure was intense. No one wanted to attach themselves to a young company being sued within days of launching. I understood. I didn't blame them, and that was my first fall. I had believed truth and capability would carry me through the early storms, but truth means nothing when buried under manufactured noise. I felt the isolation settle over me as the accusations grew louder. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I starting a war I didn't have the strength to fight? But the feeling passed quickly. I knew Richard would retaliate. I expected him to do everything he could to neutralize me. What I didn't expect was the level of ruthlessness he would reach. And that clarity did more to steady me than anything else. I couldn't stay still. I contacted an independent attorney who had advised me in several past projects. After I explained everything, he said only one sentence: "We can handle this." And that was exactly what I needed: solid ground beneath my feet. We started assembling our counter evidence. I handed him proof that I had taken nothing from the company: system access logs, documentation showing my credentials were revoked before I left, and handover emails. He told me to keep every backup related to financial misconduct in case Northbridge escalated the fight. After 2 full days of work, we sent an official legal response. Short, direct, but strong enough to make it clear that Northbridge had no grounds for their accusations. They were simply using pressure tactics. I knew that alone wouldn't restore my reputation. Richard had launched a full smear campaign, and silence would only let his version of the story define me. So, for the first time in my life, I agreed to a one-on-one interview with a major tech publication in Seattle. On the morning of the interview, I chose simple clothes, tied my hair back, and looked straight into the camera. I spoke clearly. I left Northbridge without taking any intellectual property. Everything I was building came from my own ability and from 3 years of leading strategy. My tone was steady. I didn't attack Northbridge. I didn't insult Richard. I spoke only the truth. It worked better than I expected. The interview spread quickly. People started questioning why Northbridge reacted so aggressively to one employee leaving. Neutral commentators began analyzing how the company had misused the term trade secrets to target a single individual, while my reputation slowly surfaced from the mud the smear campaign had buried it under. But the legal pressure remained. The lawsuit wasn't over. I still had to prepare for what came next. Richard would not stop because of a single interview. Still, I wasn't collapsing like before. I had my own office, my own company, clients who were still waiting for me to prove I could stand firm in the storm, and I had the truth on my side. The first fall didn't push me back. It only showed me that this path wasn't meant for anyone faint hearted, and I was not that kind of person. Rumors about the lawsuit between me and Northbridge spread faster than I expected. I thought I had prepared myself for every possible turn, but I didn't expect the person who would come looking for me to be Evan. That afternoon, I was reviewing documents inside the small Cole Insight Group office when I heard a knock. When I looked up, Evan stood in the doorway, his face pale, like he hadn't slept all night. The youthful confidence he carried the day Richard put him on stage was gone. In its place was worry, deep, cracking worry. I opened the door. Evan stepped in, standing still for a moment as if gathering himself. Ariana, I need to talk to you. I sat and waited for him to speak. Evan remained standing, his hands clenched, his voice low. Last night, I went into my father's archive. I had to know why my mother really left the company. I tilted my head slightly. It was a question I had suspected for a long time but hadn't had proof for. Evan drew a long breath, eyes fixed on the floor. I found the legal documents from 2012. My mother didn't leave by choice. My father forced her to give up all her shares. He used lawyers to threaten her with bankruptcy if she resisted. The room felt heavier. What he said didn't surprise me, but it was a wound he had to carry. He continued, voice cracking. He erased her name from the founding records, and I believed him all these years. Believed she left because she wouldn't cooperate. Believed he was the betrayed one. Evan let out a hollow laugh. I was stupid, Ariana. Too stupid to question why everything vanished so cleanly. I let him speak. I needed to hear everything. Then Evan pulled a small USB drive from his pocket and placed it on my desk. I found emails and documents about the hidden financial accounts. My father has been siphoning company money for years. Fake consulting fees, fake projects, analysis costs that never existed. All of it transferred into personal accounts under his name or through shell companies. I stared at the USB, seeing the rest of the iceberg I hadn't touched yet. Evan spoke again, quieter this time. I can't believe someone could betray his wife, his colleagues, and even his own son. My father lied to everyone. He turned to me, regret heavy in his eyes. I know it's hard for you to trust me. I know I benefited from you being pushed aside. But I didn't know anything about it. My father never told me before the party. He sees me as a tool, not a son. I studied him carefully. He wasn't faking it, he was breaking. Evan stepped closer, voice steadier. Ariana, I want out. Out of whatever power he's trying to force on me. I don't want to become him. I want to make things right, at least in some way. He nodded toward the USB. I brought this to you, not to earn forgiveness. I just need you to know the truth, and I need help. I stayed silent. I wanted him to understand that every decision I made was grounded in logic, not emotion. He continued, I don't know how to confront him, but you know what he's done. You know more than I do. I can't do this alone, but I think you can show me the right direction. He stopped, looking directly at me, not flinching. I don't want to live in his shadow anymore. I stood, walked to the desk, and studied him. Evan wasn't Richard, not in confidence, not in cruelty. Evan wasn't a replica. He was simply someone who hadn't been strong enough to see the truth earlier. I picked up the USB, turning it slowly between my fingers. It was cold, like touching a truth that had just surfaced. I spoke carefully, weighing each word. I'll look at what's in here. But let me be clear. If this is a trap, if this is your father's way of pulling me into another game, I will not hesitate to take both of you to court. Evan shook his head immediately. I'm not betraying you, Ariana. I never have. I looked into his eyes. The arrogance was gone. What I saw was someone trying to escape the gilded cage his father had built around him. I gave a slight nod. All right, I'll start reviewing everything. Evan exhaled, shoulders dropping, as if he had set down a weight he'd carried for years. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back. His voice was barely a whisper. Thank you for giving me a chance to do the right thing. When the door closed, the office fell silent. I placed the USB in my drawer and locked it. This was no longer a battle between me and Richard. Evan had just changed the entire game, and from that moment on, I knew. Northbridge was finally about to face the truth they had buried for more than a decade. After Evan left my office with the USB, I knew the fight had shifted into a new stage. Richard wasn't just an authoritarian CEO. He was the center of a data manipulation network I needed to expose completely. But to do that, I needed an ally Richard couldn't influence. And only one name came to mind: Cassandra Wynne. Cassandra was the most respected tech investigative journalist in Seattle. I met her at a data conference a few years ago, and she told me that if I ever wanted to share the truth CEOs never wanted the public to know, she would be ready to listen. I never imagined I would need her. But that time had come. I sent Cassandra a short message. 5 minutes later, she called back and asked only one question. Do you have evidence? I told her I had more than evidence. I had nearly a decade of financial fraud. We met in a small cafe in Pioneer Square. Cassandra walked in with her laptop, her notebook, and the sharp-eyed focus of someone accustomed to untangling enormous secrets. I handed her the duplicate of the files Evan had given me, along with everything I had gathered for 6 months. Cassandra spent almost an hour in silence, pausing only to underline, compare, and scribble notes. Finally, she looked up and spoke without softening the truth. Ariana, this isn't just internal fraud. Richard manipulated data in at least 2 federal projects. If what is in that USB is real, he violated federal data security law. A chill ran through me. I had prepared myself to fight Richard legally, but not to face something that could involve the federal government. Cassandra didn't give me time to panic. She started investigating immediately. She verified invoices, emails, called cybersecurity analysts, and tracked down former Northbridge employees who had left under suspicious circumstances. Some refused to speak. Some offered vague warnings. I knew something wasn't clean. Others sent Cassandra internal recordings they had kept as insurance. Only 1 week later, Cassandra showed me her findings. Richard had not only falsified data to inflate results, he created an entirely fake analytical system for a project involving a national security agency. The numbers were fabricated, and that deception helped Northbridge secure 2 lucrative contracts. Cassandra was direct. This was enough for the FBI to open a file. We understood then that we had reached the final layer of truth, and Cassandra made her decision. She would publish. When the first article dropped, the internet exploded. She did not mention my name, but everyone understood someone inside had spoken up. Richard instantly became the center of public outrage. Cassandra's newsroom released more articles over the next 3 days, each one more detailed than the last. The evidence was overwhelming. Anyone reading it could see the magnitude of the wrongdoing. The Northbridge board called an emergency meeting on the 3rd day. One board member contacted me privately, saying only one sentence. Everything you warned us about was true. I knew they were finally about to do what they had avoided for years. That afternoon, the board voted to suspend Richard. Some described the meeting as a painful 3-hour dissection. Richard lashed out, slammed the table, and threatened to sue everyone in the room. But the result didn't change. I knew it wasn't the end. And I was right. Almost immediately after his suspension, Richard struck back. He appeared in the media, insisting that I was the mastermind behind everything. He released fabricated documents and altered emails, accusing me of stealing sensitive data and leaking it to the press. He countersued for defamation, and, as always, he ended with a threat. Ariana Cole will regret going against me. I had prepared for this. So had Cassandra. And more importantly, Evan had given me the evidence Richard could never deny. The last 2 emails Evan uncovered showed Richard authorizing transfers to offshore accounts through shell companies. Cassandra verified everything and published it in the 4th article. That was the article that broke Richard's entire game. On Monday morning, Seattle was covered in a thin, gray mist when I received a message from Evan. They are coming. I knew exactly who he meant. A few minutes later, Marisa called me, her voice shaking. Ariana, the FBI is at Northbridge. I froze. They went straight to the 12th floor where Richard was meeting with the board. Marissa said Richard stood up and yelled at the agents, calling them victims of a political conspiracy. But when they handed him the arrest warrant, he had nowhere left to run. Marissa took a shaky breath before saying the final words. They put him in handcuffs, in front of the entire company. I set the phone down and looked out the window. Seattle's cold daylight felt heavier than usual. I sensed the chaos unfolding behind that arrest, but also the conclusion. Richard Hale, the man who believed himself untouchable, had fallen inside the very glass walls he treated as his kingdom. I didn't celebrate, but I exhaled. The truth had finally won, and the next chapter of my life was already opening, no longer as someone betrayed, but as the woman who stood up and ended an empire built on lies. After Richard was arrested, Seattle fell into a strange mix of noise and hesitation. Reporters chased every movement of the case, and tech companies buzzed about the collapse of a once untouchable empire. But in the middle of all that turbulence, Cole Insight Group, the small company I built inside a modest rented office, rose faster than even I expected. 1 week after Cassandra's final investigative article was published, 3 major clients I had contacted earlier officially signed with Cole Insight Group. They said they wanted to work with someone who had the courage to tell the truth. In the first month alone, we secured 2 additional projects in strategic data analysis, contracts Northbridge had monopolized for years. What I once fought for now came to me as a consequence of clarity and transparency. The small South Lake Union office quickly became too cramped. I rented the floor below and hired my first team. What surprised me was how many people left Northbridge and came to me not just to find a job, but to rebuild themselves. Amara, one of Northbridge's best data engineers, was the first. She stood at my desk and said plainly, I saw the truth too late, but if you give me a chance, I will help rebuild everything with you. I hired her immediately, not just because she was brilliant, but because I understood the feeling of drowning inside a system you once believed was right. After Amara came Kai from the creative division, then a group of 3 from the data team, people Richard had torn apart over the years. They arrived with tired eyes but fierce determination. Watching the company grow, I felt proud. But the more we succeeded, the more I realized something else. Victory didn't always feel triumphant. Every night, I stayed in the office late, not out of fear, like in my Northbridge days, but because there was an unnamed emptiness inside me. The meetings, the contracts, the hiring, the constant building. They kept me too busy to stop, because when I stopped, I could feel it. Something inside me had changed forever. The battle with Richard didn't just take 3 years of my life. It took away the version of me who believed hard work would always be rewarded. That effort always held value. Now I knew the world didn't work like that. One late afternoon, as I stood by the window watching the lake shimmer in the fading light, someone knocked. Evan stood there. He looked lighter than when we last met, though the exhaustion unique to family betrayal still lingered in his eyes. He stepped in, hands in his jacket pockets, looking around my new office with a faint smile. I came to say goodbye. I paused. Evan continued, calm but sincere. I'm leaving Seattle. I want to start over somewhere no one knows me as Richard Hale's son. I need to stand on my own. I understood. I didn't say it, but he knew. He looked at me for a moment and said, Ariana, thank you. Not just for exposing what my father did, but for helping me see the truth I avoided for so many years. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted him to stay, but another part knew he needed to leave Seattle to rebuild himself. He handed me a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was a photo of a project I once led, covered in signatures from members of the old Northbridge strategy team, some who had joined Cole Insight Group and others who had sent messages from afar. Evan said, They want you to know you created more than a 500% growth. You created a generation of people who believe transparency and decency can still win. I tightened my grip on the photo. Evan straightened, looking more at peace than I had ever seen him. Goodbye, Ariana, and thank you for helping me step out of my father's shadow. I managed only. Good luck. Evan nodded and walked out, His silhouette grew smaller under the hallway lights, his back straight, his steps steady, like someone who had finally found his own direction. When the door closed, the room felt so quiet I could hear my own breath. I looked around the office, the new lights reflecting off fresh glass walls. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the legal war, Richard's fall, and my own rise. Cole Insight Group was growing faster than any prediction, but standing at the top made me realize something. Success wasn't the destination, it was a mirror reflecting what we lost and what we had to become to survive. And in that moment, I understood my journey had never been just about defeating a powerful man. It was about learning how to live again after being betrayed by the very place I gave everything to. Success has a cost, but for the first time in years, I felt strong enough to pay it and still keep moving forward. 1 year after Richard was taken out of Northbridge headquarters in handcuffs in front of the entire company, my life had shifted into a chapter I sometimes still struggled to believe was real. Seattle remained as cold and sharp-edged as ever, but to me, the city no longer carried the weight of suffocation or fear. It felt like a page that had finally turned. That morning, just as I set my bag down on my desk in the new Cole Insight Group office, my assistant handed me a white envelope with no sender listed. I opened it without thinking until I saw what was inside. It was a printout of a major article published the day before. The headline read in bold: Richard Hale sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for financial fraud and data manipulation in a government project. The photo of Richard outside the courthouse, gaunt and gray-haired, was so different from the man who once stood under bright lights and replaced me publicly with his own son that I barely recognized him. Below the article was a short, handwritten message. The house of liars always collapses. No signature, no clue who sent it. It could have been Evan, or a former Northbridge colleague, or anyone who had lived under Richard's manipulation for years. But the strangest thing was this: I no longer cared. I read the line once, then folded the article and placed it in a drawer. Not to preserve it, but as a small ritual of closure. In my mind, that story had ended long before the verdict. Over the past year, Cole Insight Group has grown faster than I ever predicted. Strategic contracts once reserved exclusively for Northbridge were now signed with us. Clients came not out of curiosity about the scandal, but because they trusted the transparent model I insisted on building. Integrity is your greatest asset, one of them told me. I also hired many talented people again, some former colleagues who left Northbridge during its collapse. They did not come because they needed a job. They came because they wanted to work in a place where no one had to hide from the truth. When Cole Insight Group hit a stunning growth milestone at the 12-month mark, a major national analytics firm sent an acquisition offer. I sat by the window that entire afternoon, thinking. In the end, I accepted. Not because I wanted to sell the company I built from pain, but because I wanted it to have a broader reach, a stronger impact, and the power to reshape how the tech world treated data. My only condition was a seat on the board and full authority over the company's technology ethics direction. They agreed. The following month, I was invited as the keynote speaker at the largest technology conference on the West Coast. The entire hall fell silent when I stepped onto the stage, not as a victim of Richard Hale, not as the so-called winner of a legal war, but as someone who had seen the darkest side of the data industry and still chose to stand on the side of light. I spoke about transparency in data, about how numbers that seem lifeless can save a business or destroy a life. I spoke about distorted systems, decisions built on deception, and the price we pay when trust is broken. And when the speech ended, the long applause felt like every sleepless night, every wound, every loss was finally being returned to me in the form of something far more lasting. That evening, I returned to the new headquarters, a glass-front building overlooking downtown Seattle. I stood before the wide window, watching the yellow city lights blend into the deep blue of the water. The skyline reflected against the glass, making it feel as if I stood between two worlds, the past and the future. I took a long breath. No more anger from betrayal, no more fear from standing on the edge, only calm. I had rebuilt myself from what was meant to bury me. I had rebuilt my life, not to prove anything to anyone, but to look in the mirror and finally see a version of myself I no longer had to avoid. Seattle kept glowing outside, and I knew one thing with absolute clarity. My new chapter was only just beginning.